Almost there, Mataji.
Okay, no problem.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much, Mataji, for giving us your time today. And you're going to guide us in a wonderful topic that you have picked. Before you get started, everyone in at least in Orlando congregation know you. They have seen you on a stage multiple times, so they don't need much of introduction. But for the, definitely there are certain things they may not know. So just wanted to give a brief introduction about you. So Dhanya DD Mataji is a second generation practitioner of Krishna consciousness. She was born and raised in Venezuela, and she also holds a master's degree in counselor education. And she also holds a specialized degree in couples and family therapy. And she is very passionate about developing therapeutic classes, also link it to the bhakti principles and practices, which is very important for us to lead our lives and relationships. And she's also known as a well-known singer in the ISKCON community, and she's also a very good songwriter. And she travels all over the world in service of Krishna to spread his message, perform many original musical compositions, as well as collaborating with a very renowned Kirtan group, Mayapuris. They don't need any introduction. And she currently lives in Alachua and in ISKCON New Raman Reti community, very well-known member in the community. And she also serves as a member of the local child protection team. So that's a very brief introduction. I'm sure you have many more things. So Mataji, please do take us from here and into a wonderful topic that you have, want to guide us today.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me. My obeisances to all the assembled devotees and to my Guru Maharaj, to all our teachers and Srila Prabhupada. Without their guidance and assistance, all efforts are useless, and with their mercy, an effort is hopeful. So I hope that I'm able to contribute in some way. Thank you for having me for your Sunday program. These COVID times are interesting. It's making us all, I think, feel a lot of separation from being an in-person Sangha. And I think it on some level, it kind of combats this concept of, when Arjuna says in the Gita that he wants to renounce and go to the forest and practice alone. And for so many reasons, especially after the 6th chapter, Krishna illuminates Arjuna, and Arjuna realizes that it's not practical because of the difficulty of the practices, right? Because of the breathing and the postures and the alignment and the way that one has to steady the mind. And and I was reflecting this morning that I think that another reason why it might be totally unsustainable in today's day and age to kind of just renounce and go to the forest and live that kind of like Babaji bhajan style is because we would miss so much the association of devotees. Even if we were able to sustain all of these practices and we had this rigorous yogic disposition, just being around devotees, I think, would be reason enough to want to integrate back into the community. So I appreciate any invitation to interact with Vaishnavas because it really fills me up, and it lends me all of your positive qualities, at least for a short time. All right, so on that topic, I thought it would be interesting to talk about the importance of devotee relationships. And one of the things that we want to do is kind of establish this in a way that makes sense for people that have been practicing for very little time and people who are newcomers and who are just kind of getting familiar with bhakti practices and bhakti literature. But we also want to make it accessible for people who have been practicing for a long time, right? When you practice something for a long time, there can be a tendency to plateau, right? To reach a certain kind of rhythm in your practice. And, one of the downfalls, so much of the bhakti practice is to elevate us through the modes, from the mode of ignorance to the mode of passion, and then eventually to the mode of goodness. And the mode of goodness is considered to be the perfect springboard off of which to kind of elevate consciousness to a transcendental level beyond the modes of nature. One of the downfalls or the shadow side of the mode of goodness is complacence, right? We become very satisfied in how we're doing things, to the point that we don't challenge ourselves. We become peaceful, we become satisfied, and these are good qualities ultimately compared to the lower modes, where we're either depressed and lethargic, or we're struggling and we're overly ambitious. But in terms of spiritual life, we do always want to challenge. And so luckily for us, devotee relationships will always offer us a fresh challenge. And in that vein, we can appreciate, and I have here a few quotes. We have a few places, many places actually, where Srila Prabhupada elaborates why service to devotees is actually superior to service to Lord Krishna directly, right? And so I'll just quote this one verse that I found yesterday in Bhagavatam 4:24-30. Here, it's a chapter wherein there are the activities of Lord Shiva. This verse says, "You are all devotees of the Lord, and as such, I appreciate that you are as respectable as the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. I know in this way that the devotees also respect me and that I am dear to them. Thus, no one can be as dear to the devotees as I am." And so it's important here to recognize that even Krishna in his own behavior, and Prabhupada says this in the purport, that even Krishna himself worships the devotees. For example, when he descends as Lord Ram, he worships Lord Shiva. And so, even Krishna in his Gurukul training, he's taught deity worship. And so it's interesting to see how Krishna himself gives the example of rendering service to his devotees, even devotees that are like poor or kind of like unglamorous. It's not necessarily that he only worships very high, seemingly high caliber devotees such as Lord Shiva. Even when Sudama Brahman comes to visit him, Lord Krishna washes his feet and offers him all the same worship that he would give to any other rung of society in terms of his devotees. So that not only illuminates to us, first and foremost, what a beautiful kind of character and personality Krishna has, but it also illustrates to us what example we should follow, the importance of worshiping devotees. Let's see what else I have in terms of this. Yes, in this other quote from Bhagavatam, this is with the pastimes of Ambarish Maharaj and Durvasa Muni. The Supreme Personality of God had said to the Brahman, "I am completely under the control of my devotees. Indeed, I am not at all independent. Because my devotees are completely devoid of material desires, I sit only within the cores of their hearts. What to speak of my devotee? Even those who are devotees of my devotees are very dear to me." So this is an access point, because we understand that, because of our material conditioning, there may be so many reasons why we may be unqualified, unfit to worship Krishna directly. And so the devotee becomes an access point. It becomes a portal through which one can access the personality of Godhead directly, which may be like light years away for us, but through the devotee, then it becomes possible. So we can be near to Krishna by serving those who are dear to Krishna. All right. So now that we've kind of set the scene of why it's important even to establish relationships with devotees, and that devotees are ones who are fully focused in rendering service to Krishna, then we want to talk about the risk, right? The risk is that we may offend devotees. And this is a problem because we may not always do this consciously. But as we know from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in Madhya chapter 19, there's this very famous text: "If the devotee commits an offense at the feet of a Vaishnava while cultivating the creeper of devotional service in the material world, his offense is compared to a mad elephant that uproots the creeper and breaks it. In this way, the leaves of the creeper are dried up." So this is what's commonly known as the mad elephant offense, which is you could be doing all things correctly. You do your sadhana properly, and you have a seva that you're committed to, a service that you feel is aligned with your nature, and you render it happily. And, but then you have exchanges with devotees where you commit offenses, and that sort of makes you backtrack, and it doesn't undo what you've done, but it doesn't allow your bhakti creeper to grow further. It starts to dry up. It starts to wilt that very delicate bhakti creeper, right? And we have to acknowledge that in our own process of developing bhakti, it requires a lot of vulnerability. In order for us to practice bhakti sincerely, it's considered the yoga of the heart or the yoga of love. Why? Because to establish devotion, there has to be sincerity. There has to be love. In fact, sincerity is really the only thing that counts. It's the only thing we can truly give, right? When Krishna is referred to as Bhavagrahi Janardana, that means that he consumes our bhava, our attention, our love, our affection, our sincerity. That's really all that he's accepting, because he has everything else. He's married to hundreds of millions of Lakshmis. What could we, in terms of material things, really offer him? Whereas our sincerity, no one can offer that for us, and it also can't be forced. So when we offer something sincerely, there's this component of vulnerability that each and every devotee is trying to cultivate. And by committing an offense, what you're doing is shutting down their vulnerability, right? It kind of dampens their vulnerability, and it creates an environment, consciously or not, it creates an environment of fear. It creates an environment of insecurity. And it's very difficult to be vulnerable, and it's very difficult to cultivate sincerity at the same time that there's fear. Even in kind of mundane relationships, as a counselor, I can tell you that fear is what cancels out vulnerability. Right? Once you've been hurt by somebody, once you feel mistreated by somebody or treated unjustly or misunderstood, it really makes it difficult for you to open up to that person again. Why? Because there's that fear of, I'm going to get hurt again. I don't want to feel pain. So we should know that even if we're not in necessarily like family or close relationship ties with other devotees, when they come to the temple, when they come to our programs, when they're endeavoring at home, when we collaborate with them in projects, if they're really sincerely trying to cultivate bhakti, they're automatically coming to every interaction with a certain vulnerability. And if we don't honor that vulnerability, then we may accidentally or even intentionally squash that vulnerability and create an environment of fear, of pain. And then what it does for us actually is that it impairs our growing of bhakti. Our bhakti creeper doesn't grow because our vulnerability is also impaired. When we hurt another person, it's not just pain going from one direction to the other. It's pain going kind of on a two-way street. I hurt others and I hurt myself, right? When I commit an offense. And that's why it's so important in the effort to heal another and to heal myself to make amends. And we'll get to that in a little bit, but I just wanted to emphasize why devotee criticism, devotee offenses, that kind of stuff, it's no small thing. It's quite emphasized. And in many pastimes involving Lord Chaitanya, we see how severe the consequences can be in terms of the rendering of one's own personal bhakti when one doesn't treat Vaishnavas with the appropriate etiquette. This can sometimes be, I'll actually get to the next part and we'll talk about it. So we may find that in certain circumstances, we feel justified in criticizing. We feel justified because we're correcting, or because we see something that's wrong. We see some misconduct, misbehavior, something that we don't think is right. And under the impression that we are helping somebody, or that we're simply making an objective comment about somebody, we may fall into offending. This may not always look like gossip, although sometimes it does look like gossip. But it may be that we are simply just commenting on another's service, another's personality and interaction, et cetera, et cetera. So this brings to mind that Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita says that all effort that one undertakes, in that effort implicit, there is fault. Just like smoke automatically covers fire. Right? Wherever there's fire, there's smoke. And just like that, all efforts that we render in this material world, all endeavor has implicit within it some fault, just as smoke covers fire. So if we keep that in mind, for someone to find fault, for me to find fault in something that somebody's doing, it doesn't take any intelligence. It doesn't take any good character. It doesn't take any specific skill set. I'm not in any way demonstrating intelligence or skill or ability by pointing out where there's a fault. In fact, Krishna says there's going to be a fault. And so to see faults in another, or to see faults in a service, or to see faults in a situation, it's automatic. It's implicit that it's going to be there. We should understand and have it be expected that faults will be there. Another thing that Krishna says in the Gita is that to do another's dharma is extremely dangerous. In fact, he relates that it's worse than death to do another's dharma. And in terms of dharma, he says in the 3rd chapter, it is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, than another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous. So there's like this clear warning that to follow another's dharma is extremely dangerous for oneself, that even if I'm going to do my dharma, but I do it in ways that's full of faults, that I'm doing it imperfectly, it's still better that I do that dharma than try and perform another's dharma in perhaps a more effective way. And so in criticizing, in critiquing, in improving or giving feedback, in getting involved in other devotees' issues, one important consideration before I even kind of formulate the opinion and decide, oh, I'm going to talk to somebody, or I'm going to say this comment, is this my dharma? Did Krishna actually give me this service of being the one to criticize, to critique, to correct, to give input? Because if it's not my dharma, if for some reason I am not deputed to fulfill this responsibility, this is extremely dangerous actually for me. Regardless of how accurate I may be about whatever's going on over there, we already covered that there's going to be some fault in the other camp. Necessarily, there's going to be fault, just like everything I do has some fault implicit. So there's no question that there may actually be something wrong. And there's no question that perhaps I'm accurate in detecting it. But the question here is still in my territory, which is this my duty? Is this a service that pertains to me? Am I in a role where I'm supposed to be giving this feedback or correcting? Because if not, it becomes extremely dangerous for me. Now, there's obvious roles where correction, discipline, feedback, where that conversation is appropriate, right? One, like being a parent, I have a child, so it makes sense that I have to correct her, I have to guide her, or if I'm in a position of being, let's say, a professor or a teacher, then it's my job to have certain kind of boundaries, rules that need to be followed, and to give feedback when I feel like the people who are under my responsibility are not necessarily following. Same thing with being a guru or a spiritual master. But if you ask anybody who's a really good parent, or you ask anybody who's a really good teacher or a really powerful spiritual master, you'll notice that they take great care in how they correct. They're very careful in how they give feedback. They're very careful in how they instruct, so that they always maintain a spirit of protection and a spirit of empowerment of whoever they're responsible for. And so that care and that kind of delicate handling of difficult situations is the marker of a good parent, of a good teacher, of a good spiritual master. It's something that indicates to us whether their correction is coming from a place of love, and what's very important is that they understand the consequences of their feedback, right? And so the first consideration, and Ridananda Maharaj covers this in some of his talks, is the first consideration is this my dharma? The next consideration would be, what are the consequences of me interfering? If by me critiquing, giving feedback, speaking on this issue, giving my opinion, becoming involved, do I actually understand? Do I have the capacity, the intelligence to measure how these consequences will play out for all parties involved? Right? Am I just giving my feedback because I feel like it's the right thing to do, because I'm here to be honest and I'm here to, just establish the truth as I see it, and I don't want to be a hypocrite, and okay, or am I actually measuring out how this is going to play out? Do I have an understanding of the world? Do I have an understanding of relationships? Do I properly see the person or the people who I'm speaking about in their full self? And do I understand what the impact can be that I may generate by becoming involved or speaking my mind or critiquing or whatever it is. So, these are very important considerations, because immediately what ends up happening when you contemplate these things is you kind of want to say to yourself, whoa, let me slow down. Hang on a second. Let me think about this. And it gives you a pause for thought where you kind of give it another round of contemplation, and you go, maybe I don't want to get involved. Maybe I should do this more carefully. Maybe I should find out more information about the situation. Or maybe altogether I realize this is actually not my realm of service. I'm not in any way responsible for, giving this critique. I was just doing it because I felt passionate about it. So it gives you the opportunity to kind of turn the lens on yourself and say, what are my motivations for getting involved? What are my motivations for criticizing? Because I don't want to commit offenses, because this may not be my dharma or my seva, and I don't properly understand what consequences may come of my involvement. So it allows you to kind of step back and give a more kind of comprehensive plan for what your involvement may or may not be. So another thing that I wanted to mention is that that particularly in devotee communities, this one topic of gossip comes up quite often, that perhaps even out of concern, oh, I care so much about this person. Did you hear such and such happen to them? Oh, that's so terrible. That can sometimes be a reason for devotees to not want to share what's going on in their lives. And we know from the Nectar of Instruction that one of the loving exchanges between devotees is to reveal one's mind in confidence, and to receive that information from another Vaishnava. So, it's one of the most important exchanges we can engage in with another devotee. And yet we feel this hesitation because we don't know if that information is going to be held confidentially. We don't know if our emotions are going to be validated or received. We don't know if someone's just going to kind of wave a japa bag at us and say, just chant Hare Krishna and all your problems will evaporate. So this is understandable. And this is one of the reasons why perhaps something like counseling, therapy, support might be helpful, because just like when you have, when you start feeling in your body that you're not so flexible, you're not so strong, you need to do things and you feel like your body is easily fatigued, there might be a light bulb that goes off that says, if I went to the gym a couple of times a week and I really committed to getting fit in my body, all of my other services that involve my physical body might actually be easier, even though it takes a little bit of time investment. If I'm more flexible, I'm more limber, I'm stronger, I have better circulation, right? I balance out my hormones with endorphins and I lower my cortisol, maybe by doing that, I'll be able to render my service more effectively. So just like that's true for the gym and our physical body, this is also true for therapy or counseling and our subtle body, our mind, right? That's also a part of the machine that we're encased in this material world. It's part of the toolbox that we have to work with, and it can be engaged in seva, but we have to optimize it, just like we have to optimize our physical body. Having the body is not enough. We need hygiene and we need exercise in order to optimize it so that we can render our service nicely. So in the same way, if we find that often we're running into difficulties with devotees, relationship troubles, or that we have our own kind of experiences of suffering within our mind, just like, we have the different kleshas, the suffering caused by others, suffering caused by our own minds, and suffering caused by kind of the environment, the deva circumstances. So if I find that, these forms of suffering could be supported or mitigated by acquiring skills or tools, and I can dovetail that in my devotional service, then this could actually be a really powerful way of upgrading devotee relationships. Because it means that when someone reveals their mind to me, I'll know, for example, that reflective listening might make them feel very validated. When they tell me, Prabhu, I'm really struggling, my son, is having a hard time in school, and so homework takes twice as long, and I end up finishing my japa super late, and then I feel very unmotivated to chant the next day. Rather than saying, Prabhu, if you don't chant your japa, then you're breaking a vow. Don't you know that would bring terrible karma, and then your spiritual master will be okay. So that's one way of handling it. And I feel like we've all experienced feedback in that way. If you use something like reflective listening, which you would probably learn very, very quickly in counseling, you might say something like, Prabhu, I can hear that you're struggling. It sounds like you know, your son's struggling with school is really taking a toll. It's creating some stress. And I can imagine it must be very difficult to want to chant your rounds if it's late at night and you've already been doing homework for a couple of hours. And the next day you must be totally exhausted. I really empathize. You must feel very tired. You see how the tone of that is so different. And it's not that you're providing any solutions. You're not commenting. You're not in any way assigning a judgment of this is great, this is not great. You're doing poor, you're doing great. All you're saying is, Prabhu, I hear you. I see you. I'm with you, right? I'm witnessing your experience and I'm your companion. I don't need to correct you. I don't need to fix you. I don't have any suggestions, perhaps. I don't have any critiques. I simply accompany you. I offer you a listening ear, right? The loving exchanges, it says to listen in confidence and to reveal one's mind. It doesn't in any moment say you need to offer a solution, you need to coach this person, you need to become this boy's tutor, you need to, you know, nothing. All it says is just listen and reveal, listen and reveal, listen and reveal. So in that sense, what we can do is, in an effort to protect the vulnerability and to encourage devotees to share more personally, more authentically with one another, is to commit. I'm going to make the personal commitment to hold space for other devotees when they reveal their minds to me. I keep it confidential. I listen carefully. And if I feel like I would benefit from having tools so that I can listen better, so that I can be more present, I could be a better devotee companion, a better community member, then just like I would go to the gym for physical fitness, I might choose to go to therapy or counseling for relationship fitness. So that's one perspective that I think could be valuable in developing devotee relationships. And kind of in the same mood of gossip, I recently heard this story. And I think this is like a village kind of folklore story. I don't think that this is anywhere in Shastra, so please don't ask me to quote where it is because I don't know. But they were saying that there was a big yagya, a big fire ceremony that was happening in a village, and they had a very illustrious Brahmin who was the one officiating and doing all the mantras, and you know, and there was a big congregation in this village, and so many guests were present, and so there was a bird that picked up a snake in a nearby lake and flew over the fire ceremony that was happening, and unwittingly, on accident, dropped the snake, and the snake fell and bit the Brahmin, and the Brahmin died. And so when the servants of Yamaraj is the superintendent of death. Whenever someone dies, he comes and he kind of determines, okay, where's the next destination of that soul? And so his soldiers or his assistants, let's say, come and help with the decision making. And so they came and they said, well, what do we do with the karma of what just happened? You know, the karma can't belong to the Brahmin because he was the victim. Okay, well, does the karma go to the snake then? I mean, the snake fell on accident and it just bit out of instinct, and you know, it's an animal. It can't be responsible for that. It didn't even know what was happening. Well, does the karma go to the bird? Well, the bird dropped it on accident and it was just kind of flying over. It didn't mean to attack the Brahmin. It seems unfair to assign it to the bird. He was also just following his nature. And so then one of the Yamadutas said, no, actually the karma should go to the king, because the king is responsible for everything that happens in the kingdom, even the things that are not directly his fault. It's still his responsibility because he's the caregiver. And they said, you know, that also, it doesn't seem fair because the king was just trying to provide this yagya and he can't control animals that come from another village. You know, it happened in another place. It was just a total accident. So the Yamadutas actually just decided to pause and not assign the karma to anybody. So a few weeks later, in that neighboring village, another Brahmin was coming by to visit the village where the yagya had taken place. And as the Brahmin was passing through the neighboring village, he asked one of the villagers, hey, do you know how to get to such and such village? Am I on the right path to the such and such village? And the villager said, oh, you mean the village where they kill the Brahmins? And that's when the Yamadutas appeared and said, that villager gets the karma. So it's a way of kind of illustrating that so many things can go wrong in this world. And if people are sincerely endeavoring to their best ability, Paramatma in the heart, the version of Vishnu or God who's in the heart, who is the witness, is able to see our sincere intention, is able to see that we're really trying our best. And when we slip into these lesser tendencies, these lesser qualities of commenting, gossiping, even in the spirit of just connecting with other people, right? They call it gossip bonding, which is I feel closer to someone else when we talk about that other somebody else. Even in the spirit of closeness with somebody, what ends up happening is we deteriorate in our character, we deteriorate in our nature. And we already heard about how dangerous it could be for our bhakti. So I just thought I would share that kind of folk story to illustrate the dangers of gossip. Okay, so that's all the stuff of kind of like what not to do. And we talked about the importance of getting tools. Now, from a Shastric perspective, I thought it would be cool to bring in the nectar of instruction, because in the nectar of instruction, we already quoted about the loving exchanges, but I thought it was interesting that, where is the verse that I'm looking for? So when they talk about, okay, here we go, text 3. There's 6 principles that are favorable to the execution of pure devotional service. And the first quality that's named is being enthusiastic, right? Utsahan. This is cool because in relating to other devotees, sometimes it can feel quite complex. Well, how do I relate to other devotees? I don't have the time of day to get to know everybody's life story and make sure, it can feel like I'm being a little hypersensitive. No, I don't want to offend you, Prabhu, so I'm just not going to talk to you. I can't interact with this person because I don't really know what their situation is. And so we can become a little paranoid, like, wow, devotee relationships are really so high maintenance. I have to be so careful that I don't even know what to say and what not to say. And so this is why I like kind of bringing this nectar of instruction verse into play, because it says that the first quality that's conducive to rendering pure devotional service is enthusiasm. And it doesn't matter how much or how little you know a devotee. This is something we can always give to another devotee. This is something we can always give to anybody that we meet. It could be the clerk at our local supermarket. It could be our child. It could be our neighbor. It doesn't matter who we're interacting with. We can always give this quality of utsahan, of enthusiasm. So that means that even when I perceive some fault, even when I perceive a mistake, my access point to increasing this devotee's service, to increasing this devotee's devotional service, is I encourage them. So this could be something as simple as walking by somebody who's, decorating the altar and saying, Prabhu, you just have such a great eye for aesthetics. Everything that you're doing, I can see so much intention you're putting into this presentation. Really beautiful, Prabhu Jai. And that could make somebody's day. That can make somebody's whole life. Right? You hear somebody singing a kirtan and maybe they're not the best harmonium player and they're a little off key. And you could always say, Prabhu, why don't you let somebody else lead who's more talented, right? And so you might literally destroy their self-esteem. Or you could see them and say, Prabhuji, you're chanting with such devotion. Hari Bol, Jai, like so inspiring. Thank you for leading. Thank you for taking up the seva. It's not easy what you're doing and I really appreciate it. And all of a sudden, what you're doing is you're amplifying their enthusiasm. And this is the first quality that's named of so many qualities that could be named. This is the first one that's considered conducive for pure devotional service. So what we can do is commit to, as a personal commitment, we can commit to, I want to encourage every devotee I interact with. I want them to come away from interacting with me with a spirit of like, wow, I feel encouraged. I feel fired up. I feel like I can do this, right? Like by trying my best, I can please the devotees and I can please Krishna, right? And so this could be a really powerful energy, because if everywhere you go, you're encouraging by enthusing other people, right? That's something that becomes contagious. And you also create a memory for them. We all remember people who, as we establish ourselves in devotional service and as we're doing our best, devotees who encourage us make all the difference. Make all the difference. It gives us that fuel to go just a little bit further, a couple of more miles, a couple of more projects, a little bit more seva, a couple more hours, right? Even with the most difficult tasks, things that are incredibly challenging, with the right encouragement, we feel empowered to go a little bit further. And that's something that we as devotees can give, and it takes nothing from us. It subtracts nothing from our own life to just give enthusiasm, even if we're not able to give money, if we're not able to give resources, if we're not able to give, physical presence or any kind of help in a tangible way. We can always create an enthusiastic atmosphere. And that could be an enormous contribution to the people who are actually out there doing these things. So it could be that, by reflecting on this, we commit, okay, my commitment is to contribute to this utsahan. My commitment is to contribute to enthusiasm by way of positive feedback, by way of even just being present. Someone's singing a kirtan, I just sit in that kirtan. I don't even have to say anything, but it may be very encouraging for me to be physically present, right? I was recently commenting on the impact of enthusiasm, especially as we become purified. Our encouragement can have an even greater impact. Everything that we do has a greater impact as we purify ourselves, because we become empowered by Krishna to propel forth our own service. So if I'm becoming purified, as I do so, if my mission is to encourage other devotees, then that will become strengthened over time. And this is kind of demonstrated at its peak with Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada would encourage people to do services that they never even dreamed in their wildest imaginations that they would be able to do. But his purity became his empowerment, and that empowerment took the shape of this encouragement and this enthusiasm. And he was very, very intent on encouraging devotees, and was very positive and was very kind in how he would do so. It brings to mind even one little word could make such a difference. Ayendra Prabhu, from what I've heard, the only word that Srila Prabhupada ever said to Ayendra Prabhu, who's known as, he's basically like the acharya of kirtan for our age, currently our contemporary age. He was doing kirtan and Srila Prabhupada walked by and said, Jai. And that was it. And the rest is history. And literally to this day, there is not a single person doing kirtan in our society, and perhaps on a global level, who isn't in some way influenced or impacted by Ayendra Prabhu's kirtan, knowingly or unknowingly. I mean, he changed the face of kirtan on a global level. And Srila Prabhupada encouraged him with one word. So this just goes to show the importance, the impact that can be generated by encouragement. Right. And so this becomes very exciting, because you don't know if you're going to be that one person who changes the course of somebody's service by just being encouraging, which costs us nothing. So that was something that I thought was kind of important to highlight. And kind of beyond that, obviously, in devotee relationships, it can sometimes get complex. There's layers to things, and there's always reasons to kind of continue to kind of elaborate and think about it. But I thought, for today, maybe this could be something that we could meditate on, which is in what ways have I maybe been overstepping into the realm of criticizing or gossiping, and then kind of using those first few points as a way of reflecting and saying, okay, perhaps that wasn't my domain to be acting in, and perhaps it's even damaging my own bhakti to continue in that behavior. And then sort of shifting gears and saying, actually, not only do I want to make sure I don't offend devotees, I actually want to perform the service of encouraging devotees. And by encouraging devotees, I can make a big difference in their seva. I can make a big difference in my seva, because when I encourage somebody, I get excited. I get excited about what I'm doing. I get excited about what they're doing. They're much more likely to be encouraging of me. And so then that becomes an energy that becomes contagious in the same way, in a kind of converse direction, as gossip can also become contagious. So I think that it would be great if devotees encouraged one another more, even if you're not altogether aware of, everything that's going on behind the scenes of each person's life. Encouragement is something that is always helpful, is always useful. It's something that I myself appreciate and I try and give. And then beyond that, we can continue to kind of analyze, okay, in what ways do devotee relationships need to kind of continue to go deeper, and what other skills may be necessary. And as I said, it's always helpful to go for counseling, go for therapy, if you feel like it'd be a way of benefiting devotee relationships. I think that could really strengthen not just your immediate relationships, but if everybody's committed to that kind of work, then it branches out, and then people all over your community start to have that kind of elevation of quality of relationships. It translates to parent relationships, couple relationships, friend relationships, team relationships, administrative relationships, and then your whole community starts kind of vibrating at that frequency of really wanting to care for one another in a sincere way, right? Because we said that vulnerability and authenticity, they need to be there for bhakti to grow. Otherwise, what ends up happening is we kind of station at the mode of goodness. We just become complacent. We don't really grow because we're afraid of challenge. So understanding the challenge is going to imply discomfort, but if we reach for the right tools, we have the right intention, and we steer clear of committing offenses, there's actually the kind of infinite potential to grow, and that could be really exciting in devotional service. So yeah, that's what I have for you today. It's a little simple. I hope that it kind of came through in the way that I intended, and I always want to leave some space for perhaps any questions or any kind of feedback that you may have. And I'll preface this by saying, forgive any offenses that I may have made or any mistakes. That's why I open with the quote about the fire and the smoke, because we lit a fire and I'm perpetuating the smoke. So please forgive any offenses or misspeaking that I might have done. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to hear.
Hare Krishna Mataji, thank you so much. First thing I learned is we need to encourage. Your class was really wonderful. I'm not joking. It is really good.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Yeah, if anybody have any comments or questions, unmute yourself on Zoom. I'm also checking if there are any questions on Facebook. Actually, a couple of encouraging words and at least gestures. Looks to be your class is very wonderful. People are mentioning that. While others are waiting, sometimes Mataji, as you said, this topic is very, very, very sensitive. Dealing with relationship issues in the family is completely different than what we deal with the devotees, because it's very touchy. And also we feel sometimes, hey, if I do something, even though that person is wrong, I'm going to go comment. That person may get offended. At the same time, I may get some, negative credits, right?
Right.
But the thing is, sometimes we see the person is repeatedly doing this, offending you or even others in the community. Mm-hmm. But should we just stay calm, or we need to go and deal this issue?
Yeah, I think that this is a great question, because we want to be careful to not go so much to the extreme, right? We talked about being a little paranoid or being afraid of dealing with things to the point where we kind of have a standoffish attitude, or we may become victimized, right? As you're saying, if we are being personally offended, or right. And so again, this comes to the topic of dharma, right? So if someone was, let's say, offending my daughter, right? It is my dharma to protect her. It's not necessarily that my dharma is to correct that person. It may or may not be, but my dharma is to protect my daughter. And so keeping the focus in the realm of what is my duty, what is my service, then I become empowered to create solutions. And there may be a way in which I, in the dharma of protecting my daughter, interact with whoever is responsible for correcting that other person. So do they have a manager who is supposed to be correcting them? Do they have a spiritual master who is the one that is guiding them? Is it another child, and then I should talk to their parent, right? If someone was, this is a simplistic example, but if I saw in the playground that another child was harming my child, I likely wouldn't go to the child, because that's not my kid. It's so obvious that I'm not going to correct that child, because that child is not my responsibility. My responsibility is my child. I go to that child's parent. Why? Because that's their dharma. Does that make sense? So if you can move that parallel over into kind of devotee relationships, you would look for, metaphorically, who is the parent, right? Who is the person in charge of that person? And sometimes, unfortunately, I mean, and I can tell you, because I part of my service is with child protection. It's important for me, okay, if I'm working in the realm of child protection, more so than correcting offenders, it's doing preventative work that we find is where a huge emphasis is placed. Because if you create systems of respect, if you create healthy boundaries, if you create clear, understandable rules and regulations, if you understand where your dharma actually lies, which is the protection of children, the protection of women, the protection of the elderly, of the Brahmins, of the cows, if you do your work in protecting, you create healthy boundaries that prevent offenses from happening. With so many offenses and negative interactions, what precedes it, what comes kind of directly before it, usually is a misunderstanding of boundaries, is a confusion of roles, right? And so part of it is, okay, that's, what you do with the corrective piece, but also what you do with the preventative piece. What's happening before, and how do I prevent something like this from happening in the future? So by having this humble attitude of, I don't want to commit offenses, I want to encourage, I want to create a positive atmosphere, I want to steer clear from gossiping, this in no way is meant to be used as a way of avoiding confrontation or of avoiding dealing with things as they are in a harsh reality, because sometimes that is the case. All I'm saying is it has to be done delicately, and it has to be done from the perspective of understanding very clearly what is my role in that. And if I volunteered or I have been commissioned a certain service of correcting another, then I need to do that very effectively. That's the whole issue of what Arjuna is doing. Arjuna was actually commissioned the duty of righting a wrong. And even though it was incredibly painful, and even though he in his mind was thinking like, how am I going to enjoy this kingdom after murdering all my family? How am I going to live with myself after doing all of what I need to do? It was his dharma. He had actually been given that service. And so for all the difficulty and for all the confrontation that he might not have wanted to incur, he needed to do it. So it's very likely that we will have to endure some confrontation and some conflict. The important thing is to understand, am I situated in my right dharma? Do I understand my duty? And so, and sometimes it'll take feedback from at more advanced devotees, leaders, teachers to help us really kind of process, okay, what is my duty? Does that make sense? Is that an okay answer?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Mataji. I think there is a comment in the Zoom itself. What would you say is the key sign to recognize what your dharma is? I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but there's a question mark.
Yeah. So, well, there's a few things. One is that, you know, dharma typically is described as an inseparable quality. So it's not just what you can do, it's almost what you can't help but do. Right? So they say that the dharma of fire is heat and light. So fire can cook, and fire can burn, and fire can warm, and fire can cauterize, and fire can purify. But the inseparable qualities of fire are heat and light. Without those, it's not fire. So it's important, and this is usually what I answer when I come to this question, is it's important that we are in an environment where we are encouraged to contact what is our nature and what is our capacity, right? That's how we find out what service is actually the one that is corresponding to us. Is I have to know what is my nature, and I have to know what is my capacity. So if automatically from birth, you know, this is why Prabhupada speaks so openly about how incorrect it is to have a varnashram dharma by birth. Because you could be born into a Brahmin family, but if you don't have that inclination and you don't have that capacity, then it's not actually your dharma. It doesn't matter how many generations before you did it and how many generations after you did it. And the Bhagavatam is full of examples like this. Pure devotees who came from demon families, demons who came from demigod families, poor people who were Brahmins, Brahmins who were, you know, misbehaving, administrators who were great, people, you know, it's the Bhagavatam, obviously, you know, there's many exceptional situations that it comments on, but it highlights this point of appearances don't necessarily dictate what your dharma is. And so how do you know what your dharma is? You need to be in an environment where it's safe to even explore what your dharma is. You need to be in an environment that's conducive for you to find out. There has to be some introspection. There are some qualities that are very natural, right? If someone's extremely shy, their dharma is probably not to be a public speaker. If someone is extremely athletic, their dharma may be in athletics. And so it's important from birth, basically, for our families to encourage exploration and the kind of surfacing of our innate qualities. And then for those to be encouraged, and it doesn't matter if it's a girl, if it's a boy, if they're young, if they're old, if they're Western, if they're East, whatever it is, just encourage what qualities you see are natural. Right? So if a girl is a natural public speaker, if she's a natural scientist, if she's a natural, you know, whatever, then encourage that. Why would you squash that? You can't base it on the body. It has to be something that very naturally kind of comes from their qualities, because there's a reason why that's there. Just like if a boy is very into nature and understanding the way that vegetables grow and fruits grow, okay, then maybe agriculture is in their nature. So let me encourage that. Let me expose them. Let me put them in a place where they can explore that and see if they have a capacity and aptitude for that. And to the extent that they do, I encourage them to follow that, because that may be their dharma. And the other thing is, you know, once we connect with a spiritual teacher, that teacher helps to illuminate us how that service may actually kind of transform and become manifest. You know, spiritual teachers, by dint of their purity and their insight, are able to see further than we can see. They can see us at our potential rather than at what we're operating at right now. And so because they can see our potential, they can actually help kind of trampoline us, right, into a higher realm of functioning, because they see what we can do, not just what we are doing or what we're apt to do. And so your dharma can become amplified and expanded by your spiritual teacher kind of empowering you in ways that you didn't even think were possible. So I think it's both. I think it's the roots, which is, you know, a mood in the community and the family of encouragement, like really explore what is it that you have the nature to do, what's like just a natural part of who you are. And then also kind of coming from above and descending is the empowerment of the guru.
Thank you, Mataji. I think Brahma Prabhu, you had raised your hand. I don't know if you had a question.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Yes, I did have a question, and this question was answered just now. So, thank you, Mataji. It was a very profound class for me. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? I think that's it, Mataji.
Okay.
Really appreciate your time again. Please do come with another interesting topic based on your experiences that can help the community and congregation here. Looking forward to hear you again whenever your schedule permits.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Thanks for all the devotees that are listening and for having me at ISKCON Orlando. I hope to be in your physical presence soon, and if not, then sooner in your virtual presence. Thank you so much for having me.
Hare Krishna. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Thank you.